Hi, this is Sandy. Today we're working on our still life, and this time we're going to do it in watercolor. Have fun!
Okay, as you can see, I have used a pencil to put a sketch onto the pad. Because I took my time this time, it's a little more proportionate to what I want. Now I'm going to use the watercolor, and I'm going to put a wash on, what I call a wash. And it's not really concentrating on any details. It's only trying to get the color in the right spots. So where the highlights are, I want to make sure that I get those spots right. So as I do it, I'm going to be talking about my highlights and the parts where I want a little more color in. And I'm going to try and make this glass look very transparent. Okay, here we go. We know that the uh, the bottle is green. But remember, we see reflections from our peppers and our apple. So there's going to be other colors besides green. Try and turn these two colors as I'm using them. Okay, I know also that it was darkest over on this side. But it also has a reflection of light. Get some water now. Now I'm going to let it work. While I'm working this watercolor, I want to make sure to keep this as wet as I possibly can. I'm referencing the picture that we did together, looking at my highlights now. I'm not using anything else. I can take and add some yellows in here because I know that we saw yellow. And I'm going to try and get it a little bit darker. Switch brushes here. And try and get it a little bit darker over on this one side here, in here. This wash is going to be very, very loose. I don't want to put detail in as much as I want to just give it a hint of some other color. And it's starting to get dry there. So I'm going to wet down my watercolor. Because I don't want any lines in my watercolor. This is only water that I'm using, just to keep this watercolor moving. Remember that shadow we saw down here at the base? Let's get that in there. And we saw a little bit of shadow here. And I'm using a, excuse me, I'm using a purple. Now I want to get in some of the color of that apple. Red's kind of a hard one to put in because red and green make brown, but maybe that's what we need for that shadow, right here. Let's let it reflect some of that. And while I've got this apple touching, I want to make them kind of merge together. So it doesn't look like one's sitting there and the other one isn't. We'll start the apple off with that yellow. Remember we used that yellow chalk in there? The minute I touch this bottle though, this apple's going to go crazy. So I've got to be real careful not to touch that bottle. Now the same way the red was reflecting uh, on the bottle, and we had to be careful that we didn't make brown. We're going to have to do the same thing with this apple. So I'm going to kind of try and control exactly where the red and the green meet. I'm using the same colors that I used in the apple, or in the bottle of red. I don't want to switch the red color and introduce a new red color. I really don't want that to meet that, so I'm controlling exactly where it's meeting. Remember, I am not doing anything other than creating shadows here. And this is going to end up to be a little bit redder than the other apple, but that's okay. I want to put some green, some yellow down here. And I really don't want that to meet. That's fine. I can come up and get a different color there. But I do want some of this apple to go into this bottle. So now from this end, and I'm going to hope I can get the apple to go over here. I think I can by shifting my paper. That's the way I want it. Okay, now I'm going to try and get the red in back here without getting everything to run together. Now I know the jar has black on it, and I don't like black in watercolor. So I'm not going to use black, but it'll turn out dark. Okay, I'm using the same red. I don't want to switch my reds. Remember, I want this to be nice and loose, which means that I'm controlling it too much, Sandy. And I've got a little bit of a fleck of paint in here, and I'm going to have to leave that because I don't want to put my finger in it. I don't want to touch my apple to my jar. So I'm going to give it enough room. Do you remember how the jar was a little bit lighter on the side where we had light coming through? I'm going to have to get that in there. Right now, all I'm adding is water. So it's not like you have to cover it with color. Okay, there's a little bit of color here. And I want to get the highlights in now. I can just take my brush with water and I can drop some water there. And maybe there. And maybe there. Right where we had a little bit of highlight. I want to get some shadows underneath that lid. So I'm going to use that same, it's a dull purple. And I'm just going to drop it in underneath here. And let it run. I'm going to lift my pad up to encourage it to run. Give it a little bit of water. Remember that we had that shadow over here? I'm going to get a little bit of that shadow color in here. And we had a little bit of shadow color back here. Make sure you drop that in here. Still see my highlight? I do. But let's make it a better highlight right here. Connect that a little bit. This is still really wet. So I can at any time just drop color in like that. Get it in there, lift up my paper, and let it go. As long as I hit that wet spot, it's going to run. Okay, I'm going to get that lid in. Remember, it had a big highlight right there. I think I'm going to use dark blue and some of that purple. I'm going to get it in here with that purple. Trying not to touch the bottom one, because once I do, that color's going to run. There's the highlight. There's a highlight. It's a little bit lighter on the top, so I'm going to let it get lighter. I'm going to get some really dark blue. Just on certain edges. Not really painting as much as I'm just letting this color move. And if the color isn't moving the way I want to, I'll lift that up, move it around that way. Oops, see, it got into that jar. Okay, I think I'm gonna I just took some of that color off of there, but I'm gonna leave that now. Okay, my hand touched there, so that's gonna be a problem. I love what my bottle looks like. Doesn't look like you can just look right through it. And I really do like my apple. All of this has to dry before we can do anything else to it. So, with that said, I'm gonna let it dry and come back to it later. Okay, a couple hours have passed and the paper is the same temperature as the wet paper was to the dry paper. So all of it's now the same temperature. A wet paper, it's going to be a colder temperature. If you paint on it and it looks dry, check the temperature. Okay, I went through and on the highlights, I wet my brush, and it's not real wet, but it's semi-wet, and I reinforced my highlights where I know there's a highlight. That's wet now. If I take my brush or my cloth and I blot, I'm lifting out just a little bit of highlight. It's a real controlled lift. I'm doing this now because I'm going to be coming back here and I want this to dry. Not lifting a lot in spots, just a little bit. Okay, that was our first wash. I established my dark darks and my light lights. There's no details put in on this. My next step is to do another wash where I'm going to establish my shadows and reinforce any dark darks. I don't want to put my details in yet. So everything will be done with a brush that is larger. And it won't be a fine line brush. So let's get into our shadows. You know, we think shadows are black or gray, but the shadows are actually reflecting on our surface. So I'm going to put in some of the darks here, and I'm going to use the same colors I did before, which was this green. And I'm just going to come down, reinforce that green. Get some water in here. Let it go. And then I'm going to tell the shadow where to go. We knew it started at the base of the bottle. So I'm going to just give it a little bit on the base and take it straight back like that. There's our shadow. I don't like the way this is right here. So I'm going to just give it a little water there, a little brush of water, and let it work itself out. Eventually I'm going to come in and I'm going to really reinforce this dark, but I want to make sure that I've got enough of the color in here to give that shadow appearance. Remember on our setup, we said we could see the lights from the bottle reflecting. I'm going to try and achieve that. Okay, so I've got the shadows in on the bottle. Now I would like to put the shadows in from the apple. I've got the apple reflecting in the bottle. I can take this and just give a little bit of a highlight right here and lift that one little piece out as though the shadow from the apple can be seen there. Now remember that the shadow from the apple is going to be circular, and it's going to go right into the shadow from the bottle. So I'm just kind of got a wet brush here. I'd really like my shadow to flow, so I'm getting it wet outside of the apple, and I'm telling when I put my paint down, I'm telling it where I want it to go. So what am I going to use for the shadow color? Shadow on the apple, I can start with red, same color as in the apple. And I know my deepest shadow is against the apple. And if you notice, I am just dropping this in. I'm trying not to work the color. I'm trying to let it move on its own. I want it to go up into that bottle. So that shadow's going to stay there, and it's going to stay right where I put it. But the shadow isn't only that color. I'm going to put some green down here. We know that green and red are going to make brown. So I'm giving it a grayish brown shadow to move around. Now what I really like happening is you can see where the shadow has actually gone into the bottle, and that's perfect. I didn't have to do any work. I'm going to give it a little touch of dark in the corner. And maybe down at the very beginning. Really ground that apple onto that table. Now I'm going to pick it up, move it around. Okay. I'm really liking this. My next part is a shadow underneath here. See how the shadow in the bottle started in the front? I'm going to need my shadow under here to start in the front. I'm not going to put much of a shadow back here. I kind of like it the way it is, but we'll have to see. So I'm wetting down my paper where I want this shadow to go. Trying not to touch the apple because I don't want a dark shadow in there. And I'm going to see how this works before I work that back one. Okay, the shadow, I'm going to start with, I like this shadow here, so I'm going to start the exact same way with this red. Just dropping it in here. Get enough color so that it wants to move on its own. There it goes. Okay, rinsing my brush out. Now I'm going to pick up that green. I really don't want to introduce another color into this picture than what the colors I've got here. If you start getting too many colors, you lose your focus. I'm letting that shadow run on its own. And I'm going to get this just a little bit down there. Okay, I may need to go back here a little bit. So I'm going to get it wet back here. Got to show that that's a big jar. Same thing, put a little bit of that red that I've got working here. Add a drop of green. Okay. Now, you see this white line here? I don't want that. So I'm getting my brush wet with water, and I'm just going to, remember when we pushed our color? And try and push the color into here. It's a little bit wet. Now I'm going to pick up a little bit of that red. There's a piece of pigment here that I don't want in. There it goes. Okay, see how that got into my apple? I really don't want that to happen.
Okay, looking good. Let's work on this apple a little bit over here. Let's push that color out instead of pushing in. That worked better. Okay. Now I'm ready for my details. If you see this spot down here, that's going to be a problem. But I'm not going to do anything for it until everything is dry. Then I'm going to ease this with a little bit of water and a brush, and a dry brush. Okay, so I might pick up my rigger brush now and decide, what do I need for details? I see I need right here some way to pull that out. So I'm going to just use water. There, that looks pretty good. Now that looks like a lid. I'm going to need to get in here and give it a stem. I know it doesn't have one on the picture, but I want to put one in there. I'm going to use this brush right here to even that up a little bit. Now I really like this. But I'm going to need a darker line right here. But I need to let that dry first. So we know that green and red make brown. And if you've ever noticed my palette, I don't have any brown in here, do I? So I'm mixing up a little bit of green and brown out here, or green and red, to make brown. And I'm going to put that out there. I'm not getting any highlights on it though. So maybe I'll come in with a little bit of gold and drop this on it. And this is going to take me coming back in after it's all dry and redoing this stem. I got a little messy. I really want to get this a little bit of, not only texture, but depth here. So I'm taking some of that moon glow, laying some color on, and now I'm just going to ease it in there with a wet brush. No color on this brush, it's pretty wet. Just using what was down there, what I put in here. Just stroking as though I were stroking that stem of the apple. Okay. Other than putting a couple of highlights right here, and I've got a little tray here of white. White turns a little chalky, and so I don't like to have to use it, but I lost my highlights on my bottle. And there's one right here, so I'm reinforcing it. I don't want it to be so white. The reason I don't have my white on my palette is because it turns very chalky. Watch what happens if I mix my red here with some of this white. See the chalk? It doesn't really do much for it. You've lost that translucent, transparent in your work. Okay, this needs a lot of work here. So I'm going into that dark purple that I had. And I'm going to try and pull the back away from the front. See, wherever it was wet from me working with it the other way, it wants to go there. And that's too wet. But it's looking better. Now I'm going to get some blue. I know that blue is a cool color. There we go. And I might get some of that blue down in this stem, right at the base. I'm working back and forth here with water and no water. I'm not liking what I'm seeing, and I'm just wiping it out and starting over. Okay, I'm getting clean water in my brush, and I want to make this look like it's got a nice big highlight right here without picking up that water from the stem. There it is. Now I like that highlight. Now you might wonder why I don't put black on here for the shadow, or even gray. Black is not a natural color. If you put all of your paint in one little tray, just bits and pieces of everything, you would get black. You have the ability to make the black that you need. So I would rather have a black that looks natural than a black in my palette which will cover everything up. See how I'm getting that wet all over? That's pretty wet yet, but I'm going to try it. Okay. What we have here is a study. I don't have a background painted. I just have the basics, my 3 objects and their shadows painted. This is all we need. I mean, I have lots of pictures on the wall where I haven't done anything to the background and I haven't done anything to the foreground. If at this point I think It might need a little bit of a background. I might just go in and say, all right, let's put some of that gray color that I have, the purple gray, and just kind of dot it here and there. Nice straight lines. And then put it up. Touch it with water. This tells me that, yeah, there's a background back there. Not very important. See, once it hits that water, it just wants to move on its own. Now it looks like it's sitting on a table. That's all we need. So keep your pictures fresh, and I'd really like to see what you come up with. If the whole thing is too much for you, I want you to just do the bottle. Do the bottle in watercolor. Then, if you've got leftover room, do the peppers. Then, after you know you can do this one and you know you can do this one, put it together and have an apple in there. That's the best way to learn how to paint. You can't expect yourself to do the bottle and know how to do it, or to know how to do the bottle and then everything else. Just work on one thing, but I've shown you, I just put my finger in it, I've shown you how to put it together. So just do the one thing and I'd be happy. Okay, next week, guys.